I was done with the lake, and I was hoping I was also done with the nightmares. I was hoping that the nightmare was over. Unfortunately, it was a false hope. As I was walking past the shops, I began to see something odd in the windows, a reflection. Something seemed to be following me. The reflection didn't seem normal. It wasn't human. Even though I couldn't tell what it was, I could tell that. It looked beastly. I was trying to ignore the reflection, hoping it would go away. Of course, that didn't work, because it continued to follow me. I looked the other way, away from the windows, saw my shadow beside me, but I also saw another shadow. That shadow didn't look human. It looked beastly. It scared me quite badly. The shadow itself was bad, horrifying all by itself. I didn't want to see the beast that was casting that shadow. It looked like it had horns on its head and claws instead of fingers. I looked straight ahead, tried to ignore the reflection and the shadow, but I couldn't ignore the noises, even though I tried. The noises were almost as bad as the shadow and the reflection. The noises were growls, but there were also slurping noises. I continued to walk. I wanted to get to my Jeep. I wanted to get away from the lake. I wanted to get away from the nightmare. I ignored the reflection, the shadow, and I tried to pretend that I didn't hear the noises. But it wasn't working. The noises were there, as were the reflection and shadow. When I got to my Jeep, I finally saw the reflection clearly. In the driver's side window, it was even worse than what I had imagined. The reflection I saw reminded me of a story I had written, The Pretenders. The thing in the reflection was green and scaly, with horns and reptilian snake eyes. It's not real. It's just a figment of my imagination. They don't exist. The Pretenders was just a story I made up, I thought. I shut my eyes, rubbed my eyelids, then opened my eyes. The reflection was still there. The noises were too. I spun around, looked all around. There was nothing there. When I turned back toward the Jeep, the reflection was still on the window. I tried to ignore it by looking at the handle, but I couldn't ignore the noises. The growling and slurping noises were there. I closed my eyes, covered my ears. This isn't happening, I thought. I opened my eyes. The reflection was gone. I smiled, turned around, and screamed. It was right in front of me. A beast, one of the Pretenders. It reached for me. I took a step back, backed into the Jeep, and the Pretender grabbed at me. I didn't like that grin. It revealed too many sharp, pointy teeth. I turned to my right. The Pretender swiped at me, and I ducked. I stood up, began to run. Then I heard a horn blow. I turned toward the horn, saw a school bus. It was right on top of me. The bus hit me. I screamed out in surprise and pain and landed in a heap. I looked at the bus just before I passed out. I could see a grinning skull looking out the window at me. The skull began to speak, and his words followed me into the darkness.
I told you that I would be paying you a visit if you didn't finish writing my story, but you didn't listen. I have decided to vote you out as the author and finish you off. I'll finish writing my story myself. It will be written, one way or the other.
The darkness overtook me, and I knew no more for a while. Part 24. Reflection in the mirror and window. I jerked awake, looked around. I was in the pizza pub. It was quiet. I looked around, expecting to see that the place was packed, but it was totally empty. I got up and stretched. My neck and back were both stiff from sleeping in an odd position. It felt like I had been asleep for a long time. I walked to the bar, listened, but didn't hear any noises coming from the back. After a moment, I turned around and looked out at the deck. There was no one out there either, and I didn't see anyone in the store next door either. I began to walk to the door, meaning to look around outside. Then I glanced at the mirror. I stopped dead in my tracks. I saw the pizza pub, but it wasn't the same one that I was standing in. The pizza pub in the mirror was packed. There were people everywhere. I turned around, looked around the pizza pub that I was in. There was no one there. I turned back around, looked at the mirror. The pizza pub in the mirror was full. I walked over to the mirror, touched it. It was solid. People were moving all around in that other pizza pub. This can't be happening. This kind of stuff doesn't happen in real life. It isn't real, I thought. I heard movement behind me. It was faint, just a whisper of movement, fabric against fabric. I also began to smell something. It was a smell of decay and death. I saw a reflection in the mirror, not an image, but a reflection like you would see in glass. I spun around, looked everywhere. There was no one there. I looked at the window across from me, saw a reflection of something. There was someone or something standing directly behind me. I couldn't tell what it was, though. I spun around, looked. There was no one there. I felt something brush the back of my neck. It felt like fingers. A cold chill ran through me. I hollered out, looked at the mirror. I saw a reflection behind me. I couldn't make out any of the details of the thing that was standing behind me. Not by the reflection, but the stench that filled my nostrils told me that the thing was dead. I spun around. There was no one there. I felt something brush the back of my neck. A cold chill ran through me. Then I heard an intake of breath directly behind me. The skin on the back of my neck tightened down. The hair stood up and began to crawl. I looked at the window, saw a reflection, but I still couldn't make out any of the features. I spun around. There was no one there. The fingers brushed the back of my neck. I heard an exhalation of breath, and I felt it on the back of my neck. I broke out in goosebumps. That was the final straw. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran for the door. I didn't stop for my notebook or to pay my bill. I just got the hell out of there. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't look anywhere but straight ahead. When I got to my Jeep, I got in, reached for the ignition. Then I heard an exhalation of breath and felt the breath on the back of my neck. I spun around and hollered out in surprise. I was no longer in my Jeep. I was back in the pizza pub. This can't be happening. This isn't real, I thought. Something brushed the back of my neck. Half-rotting fingers, skin and bone.
This is happening. It's real.
A voice whispered behind me. I hollered out, spun around. There was no one there.
This is fun. I'm going to enjoy writing my story. It's fun writing scary. Almost as much fun as scaring people to death, for real. I told you to finish writing Bus 67. All you had to do was listen.
A voice whispered behind me. I spun around. There was a rotting corpse there. He gave me a half grin. That was all he could give me, because half of his face was rotted away.
Boo!
The rotted corpse hollered. The rotting corpse was Bobby Richards. You can't be here. You aren't real, I said.
I'm here. I'm real. I think it is time for me to do away with you. This has been fun, but it is time for me to get to my story. Goodbye, E.T. brother.
Bobby Richards said. I turned, began to walk, and looked back over my shoulder. There was no one there. I looked back to the front, screamed, and stopped dead in my tracks. Bobby Richards was standing there, grinning his half grin. I began to back away from him. He shook his head no and grinned.
Bad idea, E.T. brother.
Bobby said. I ignored him, continued to back up, then realized that something wasn't right. The ground didn't feel right beneath me. I looked down and screamed out in surprise and terror. The ground had felt wrong because I was standing on thin air. The floor was gone. I was looking into what appeared to be a bottomless pit. I began to fall, tried to grab for something, but there was nothing to grab a hold of. As I fell, my mind slipped a cog and went away. Part 25. It's just a pen. Words can't hurt you. When my mind finally returned and I realized where I was, I saw I was back in the pizza pub. I looked around. The place was packed. Everyone was talking, laughing, and carrying on conversations like everything was normal. I'm back. The nightmare is over, I thought. I looked at the table. My bill was there, and I put a 20 down to cover it. I grabbed my notebook, got up, and headed for the door. The bartender waved. I waved back, then walked out. I glanced at the strange little door that had started all of this. The door was different. It was a normal door. I smiled. The nightmare is over. It was just a crazy nightmare, but it's over. Things are back to normal. I can tell. Everything feels right, I thought. I turned from the door, began to walk toward the lake. I planned to walk by the grassy area. I wanted to prove to myself that the nightmare was over. As I passed the window of the pizza pub, I looked at them. I saw my reflection, but no others. I smiled and walked to the steps that led down to the grassy area. As I walked down the steps, I looked at the grassy area. It looked normal. It was just a grassy area. I stopped, looked around. It was just grass. Nothing special, just a grassy area. Nothing more than that. I smiled, turned away, and walked down to the lake. I stopped, listened, but didn't hear any ducks. I looked around at the lake. It looked normal and tranquil. I looked in